Hey Willowbrook, my name is Jared. I'm one of the pastors at the Madison campus. Thanks for joining us in another deep dive into the scriptures. Today we find ourselves in Acts chapter 27. In fact, we have a long passage that we're covering today in Acts chapter 27, verses 1 through 26. Hopefully you've already read it and know what's going on, but in case you haven't, I want to just catch you up a little bit and give you a summary of where we are. Paul is on his way to Rome. He's not by himself, he's with his companions. And of note, his companions on this journey include Luke. Acts chapter 27 starts in verse 1 by saying the words we. And usually when we read the word we, it refers to Luke, the author of Acts, being together with Paul and his companions. And that's definitely the case here. And it's noteworthy because we haven't seen that before in quite some time. The last time Luke was together with Paul, and we knew about it, when that word we was used, was Acts chapter 21, verse 18, so quite a while ago. This journey to Rome is not going to be an easy one. It's going to be one of a journey on the water that doesn't go so well. It's going to be one that we see storm after storm, trouble after trouble, and where Paul speaks up and says, and at one point in the journey, guys, I don't think we should go any further from here right now. Let me just kind of show you that in verse 9. It says, when considerable time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over, Paul began to admonish them. He's talking to the people who are in charge of the trip, and he's saying, hey, I don't think we should be going any further right now. And he said to them, men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo in the ship, but also our lives. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what Paul was saying. So Paul speaking up here and says, hey, I'm discerning that we shouldn't go any further right now. But the guy who's in charge listens to the other people instead of Paul. Let me stop there and say that I think we have a great lesson here. Have you ever fallen for the mistake of listening to earthly experts rather than godly advice? I think a lot of us have experienced that, have we not? I think a lot of us have had people weigh in and say, well, hey, I know a lot about this, or I'm an expert in this field, and I'm telling you, I don't think that you should do this. And a godly person was telling you, well, hey, I think that you should, or maybe vice versa. It can be really tempting for us to listen to the experts of this world and drown out the voices of godly people that we trust, especially when the godly advice they're giving us is not stuff that we want to hear. You ever been there? Don't fall for that. That's the first bad decision that we see here in this story. But I think we see another one follow just after that. Let's look at verse 12. It says, because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there if somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete. Did you see that? A majority reached a decision. And this is another way that we can make a bad decision if we're not careful. If we just go with what the masses tell us, or even the majority tells us, sometimes taking a vote is not the best idea. Think about that in the realm of all of the Bible's history. Sometimes the majority was not in the right, were they? What about the Israelites when a majority of them, a lot of them, wanted to go back to Egypt, to the slavery that they once were in? What about those same Israelites in the Old Testament when a majority of them wanted a king, even though they had been warned about how having a king like the other peoples may not be the best thing for them? What about when Jesus was on trial and people had the opportunity to free him or free Barabbas? The majority was not right in that situation either, were they? The majority is not always going to be right in your life either. Don't take a poll when you want to know what the right thing to do is. It'd be much better to listen to godly counsel from people walk closely with Jesus Christ and are on their knees constantly looking for God's will. This story could have been a little bit different here if those people had listened to Paul. and the godly advice that he was giving. Now, later on in the chapter, after even more bad things have gone on, Paul has a vision, and then he thankfully has some good news for what's going on with all the trouble that they'd have. And after they'd had to throw things overboard, and after they had been violently storm-tossed, verse 18 says, thankfully the story ends up good. In verse 23, Paul has a vision. He says, "For this very night an angel of God, to whom I belong and to whom I serve, stood before me, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You will stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you.'" So thankfully, the bad decisions of these people not to listen to the godly advice didn't mean the end of their lives. It didn't mean that their journey wasn't going to make it to where they wanted to go. But for us, we're not promised that. I haven't received that vision. I've received a word from God every time I've made a bad decision that everything was going to go great. Sometimes we pay the natural consequences for our bad decisions. I want to challenge you. Don't listen to earthly advice more than godly counsel. Don't listen to the majority more than you listen to the godly people that are around you. Have a great day, Willowbrook.